Cut that chain before you destroy the evidence. Mason Reed's voice stopped the tow operator with one hand still blackened by grease. Behind him, the repaired school bus idled beneath the fluorescent lights while 10-year-old Lily aimed her red flashlight at the burned brake control module in her father's palm. Victor Crane tightened his grip on the suspension order. Then 3 black SUVs stopped outside, and Governor Rebecca Hale stepped onto the gravel. 47 minutes earlier, the garage had smelled of cold coffee, diesel exhaust, and rain carried through the half-open service door. Mason lay beneath the front chassis of Bus 17, his faded navy coveralls pressed against the concrete, listening as the rebuilt system completed another pressure cycle. The gauge needle rose, settled, and held. No sudden drop, no warning tone, no tremor in the brake line. "Still green, Dad," Lily said from behind the yellow safety stripe. She held the flashlight with both hands, careful not to step past the boundary Mason had marked with 2 orange cones and a strip of shop tape. Her backpack rested beside Frank Ellis's desk, one shoelace tied with a knot where the plastic tip had broken off. Mason glanced at it, remembering the transmission job he had canceled that weekend. The job that would have paid the last of his late wife's hospital bill and bought Lily the winter shoes she needed. He looked back at the bus. 17 student names were taped beside the route sheet near the folding door. "One more cycle," he said. Margaret Hale stood near the workbench, her red route notebook held against her coat. She had barely slept. The deep lines beside her mouth seemed sharper beneath the white shop lights, but her eyes stayed fixed on the bus as if listening for an apology from the machine. Mason reached up, checked the replacement module's connection, then slid out from under the chassis. He did not smile when the pressure held. He simply wrote the numbers on a clean inspection sheet and signed the time. "It can run," Margaret whispered. "It can pass this test," Mason corrected gently. "That isn't the same thing as being cleared to carry children." Tires ground across the gravel. Outside, a tow truck entered first, its amber lights turning slowly against the garage windows. Victor Crane stepped from a district sedan behind it, wearing a charcoal overcoat and the calm expression of a man arriving to enforce something regrettable but necessary. 2 local officers followed him. "Morning, Mr. Reed," Victor said. "I was hoping you would make the sensible choice." Mason folded the inspection sheet and placed it beside the sealed metal box containing the burned module. The sensible choice was checking the brakes. Victor glanced toward the running bus. His smile remained polite. "You were specifically instructed not to alter district property. I documented every step. Documentation does not create authorization." Victor handed Frank a suspension notice and gestured toward the tow operator. "The vehicle will be removed. Your tools may need to remain untouched until the district completes its review." Lily looked from the paper to her father. "But he fixed it for free." The sentence was small, almost swallowed by the compressor cycling off, yet one officer shifted his weight and looked at the bus again. Victor's smile thinned. "That is not the point, young lady." The tow operator dragged a steel chain beneath the front axle. Mason saw where the hook was being placed and moved immediately. Not toward Victor, not toward the suspension order, but toward the truck controls. "Stop!" The chain tightened with a metallic groan. Mason slapped the emergency cutoff. The garage fell still except for the bus engine. Victor stepped closer. "You have no authority to interfere." Mason held his gaze. "Hook it there and you damage the steering assembly. Then you'll have the failure you came here expecting." Margaret's fingers closed around the red notebook. Lily lifted the flashlight as Mason knelt beside the sealed evidence box and removed the burned module with fresh gloves. The casing was blistered, its serial number ground away except for 4 surviving characters along the lower ridge. That was when the black SUVs appeared. Rebecca Hale emerged with a state transportation inspector and an auditor carrying a dark blue case. She did not greet Margaret. She did not reassure Mason. She studied the chain, the axle, the module, and the people surrounding them. "No one touches the bus," she said. "This site is now under independent review." Victor gave a measured nod. "Governor, with respect, that component cannot be considered reliable evidence." The casing was already opened. Mason looked down at the sealed screws, then slowly back at Victor. No one in the garage had told him the casing had ever been opened. Rebecca's gaze moved from Victor's face to the sealed screws on the blackened module. She did not accuse him. She did not defend Mason. She simply asked, "How did you know the casing had been opened?" Victor adjusted the cuff of his charcoal overcoat. "Standard assumption, Governor. Mr. Reed has been working on district property without authorization." Mason said nothing. He lowered the module onto the clean cloth as carefully as if one careless movement could erase the truth. 3 days earlier, the same garage had smelled of rainwater, hot rubber, and the metallic sweetness of old coolant. Late Friday sunlight entered through the service doors in narrow gold bars, catching dust above the concrete floor. A district tow truck backed into the yard with bus 17 hanging behind it, the yellow paint dulled by years of winter salt and gravel roads. "Park it outside. Don't connect a scanner. Don't remove anything." Victor Crane delivered each instruction without raising his voice. His navy tie was perfectly centered, and his leather folder carried the school district seal in polished silver. Frank Ellis wiped both hands on a rag before accepting the paperwork, though there was no grease on his palms. He read the first page twice. "It says temporary storage." "That is correct." "It also says the vehicle is condemned." "Also correct." The fluorescent tube above the front bay flickered once, then settled into a thin electric hum. Outside, rain tapped the bus roof with the soft persistence of fingernails against a closed door. Margaret Hale climbed down from the passenger side before the tow operator could lower the rear chain. She wore her district jacket buttoned to the throat and held a red route notebook against her ribs. "That bus lost brake pressure near County Road 9, she said. "I reported it before the last 2 stops." Victor turned toward her with an expression almost gentle. "Margaret, we have discussed this. You told me the sensor was wrong. The maintenance department found no critical failure. You never inspected it after I brought it back." Victor's smile did not disappear. It became smaller, more careful. "Stress can affect how anyone remembers a frightening moment. You have served this district for 31 years. No one questions your dedication." Margaret opened the red notebook. Her fingers trembled, but her voice did not. October 8th, 7:12 in the morning. Pressure warning on the east grade. October 22nd, 2:46 in the afternoon. Engine shut down at the church crossing. Thursday, 6:53. That is enough. Victor's tone remained professional, yet the words closed over hers like a door. He glanced toward the tow operator and then toward Frank, inviting them to share the discomfort of watching an older woman refuse kindness. "The district is prepared to offer Mrs. Hale paid administrative leave, while we evaluate whether retirement may be in her best interest." Margaret's grip tightened around the notebook. She was not being called a liar. That would have required an accusation she could answer. Instead, she was being wrapped in concern until no one could hear her warning beneath it. Mason stood near the tool cabinet in faded navy coveralls, a socket wrench still in one hand. Victor had looked past him twice since arriving, speaking only to Frank as though the man who repaired heavy diesel systems for a living were part of the equipment. Mason stepped close enough to see the document in Frank's hands. A vehicle number had been typed near the top, but the last character had been corrected in blue ink. Beneath it, Victor's signature crossed the date in a sharp, hurried angle. "What replaces the route Monday?" Mason asked. Victor looked at him for the first time. His eyes traveled from Mason's worn work boots to the frayed edge of his sleeve. "Excuse me? 17 students are listed on that run. What bus takes them?" "Monday. Transportation planning is being handled." "By another vehicle? By the district?" The answer was smooth enough to sound complete. Mason glanced through the folding doors. Paper stars had been taped above several seats, each one carrying a child's first name in colored marker. 2 names belonged to children Lily knew from school. "Some of those families live 12 miles out," he said. "Mr. Reed, you repair engines. You do not decide policy." Mason rested the wrench on the workbench instead of tightening his grip around it.
No.
But engines don't care what policy says when children are inside. The tow operator stopped winding the rear chain. Frank looked down. Margaret raised her eyes from the notebook. For one brief second, Victor's pleasant expression failed to reach his eyes. Then it returned. This is precisely why unauthorized involvement creates risk. People become emotional. Procedures exist to protect everyone. He slid a second page toward Frank. It prohibited diagnostic access, component removal, electrical testing, or road operation. Mason read it without touching it. If the bus is dead, what data are you protecting? The integrity of district property. That wasn't my question. Rainwater ran from the bus tires and spread across the garage floor in a dark crescent. Somewhere inside the dashboard, though the key was no longer in the ignition, 3 weak electronic beeps sounded and stopped. Victor's head turned toward the bus too quickly. Mason noticed. So did Margaret. Victor closed the leather folder. Sign the storage receipt, Frank. We all have responsibilities. Frank hesitated, then signed. Mason did not shame him for it. He moved a bucket beneath a leaking roof seam before the water reached Margaret's shoes, then picked up a clean shop towel and placed it beside her red notebook. A small act. Quiet. Almost invisible. As Victor walked toward the door, Mason studied the inspection sticker on the windshield. It was less than 3 weeks old, but heat had bubbled one corner upward. Beneath the white sticker, a narrow strip of orange showed through like something trying to surface. Mason lifted his phone and photographed the glass, the odometer, the vehicle plate, and the altered character on the condemnation form. Victor stopped with one hand on the door. There will be no need for pictures, Mr. Reed. Mason lowered the phone. Then they won't hurt anything. Victor held his gaze for a moment, then left without answering. Only after the district sedan disappeared through the rain did Mason notice the final inconsistency. Victor had forbidden them from changing stored diagnostic data, but the condemnation form stated that Bus 17's electrical system contained no recoverable data at all. Mason read the condemnation form again beneath the humming fluorescent light. The paper claimed Bus 17 contained no recoverable electrical data, yet Victor had forbidden anyone from connecting a scanner that might alter it. One statement erased the evidence. The other protected it. They could not both be true. Rain whispered against the service doors while Frank Ellis locked the front office and counted the day's receipts twice. The bills in his hand were thin enough to fold without resistance. Leave it alone, Mason. I'm only reading. Reading turns into checking. Checking turns into the district taking my license. Frank set the cash drawer inside the safe and rubbed both palms over his tired face. He was 61, with silver hair that always seemed to hold a trace of engine dust, and fear had made his shoulders look older that evening. The garage owed rent in 12 days. 2 hydraulic lifts needed inspection. 1 complaint from the school district could finish what 3 slow months had started. Mason folded the form along its existing crease and placed it back inside Victor's leather-edged storage packet. He did not tell Frank that fear was a poor reason to ignore a brake warning. Frank already knew. That was why he could not look toward the yellow bus outside. Lily sat on a wooden stool near the parts counter, finishing a math worksheet beneath a desk lamp. Her red flashlight rested beside her pencil case. One sneaker tapped softly against the cabinet, the lace tied in a thick knot where the plastic tip had broken away. Mason had promised to replace those shoes before the first hard freeze. The transmission job scheduled for Saturday would have covered them, along with the final payment on the hospital account that still arrived each month in his late wife's name. He kept those envelopes in the bottom drawer at home, beneath Lily's old drawings, because grief was difficult enough without seeing it printed beside an amount due. Dad! Lily pointed through the glass toward the route sheet hanging inside Bus 17. Is that Noah Bennett? Mason followed her finger. The paper listed 17 students in black district ink. Noah Bennett. Cale Ruiz.
Samuel Porter.
2 names Lily knew from Pine Ridge Elementary, and several addresses Mason recognized as farms beyond the county road, miles from the nearest regular bus stop. Looks like it. His grandma doesn't drive when it's icy. Lily looked down at her worksheet, then added, He missed 4 days last winter. She did not ask Mason to save the bus. She was 10 years old, and to her the problem was still simple. A broken thing prevented a child from reaching school, and her father fixed broken things. Margaret remained near the service door, rainwater darkening the shoulders of her district jacket. She had not left with Victor. The red route notebook was still pressed against her ribs, guarded more carefully than a wallet. "I'm not asking you to repair it," she said. Frank exhaled sharply. "Margaret, I know what the order says." She looked at Mason. "I only need someone to tell me I didn't imagine that warning." There was no drama in her voice. That made the request heavier. A woman who had driven children safely for 31 years was not asking to be called brave. She was asking whether her own memory could still be trusted. Mason looked toward the bus, then at the invoice clipped above his workbench for Saturday's transmission job. $800 labor. He could almost hear his wife teasing him for calculating family life in repair hours. 2 hours for groceries, 5 for electricity, a full Saturday for shoes, and one more piece of the past. He removed the invoice, took out his phone, and called the customer. "Mr. Dawson, it's Mason Reed." He listened. "I need to move your truck to next weekend." Another pause. "No, sir. Nothing wrong with your vehicle. Something came into the shop that may involve school transportation." The customer was not pleased. Mason apologized, accepted the loss of the job, and did not ask to be understood. When the call ended, he placed the invoice face down. Frank stared at him. "You need that money." "I know. The district won't pay you." "I know that too." "Then what are you doing?" Mason took 2 orange cones from beside the compressor and carried them toward the bus, checking whether she was right. He did not say he was defying Victor. He did not call himself courageous. He simply marked a safety boundary around the vehicle, placed wheel chocks behind the tires, and disconnected the main battery according to procedure. Then he turned to Lily. "You stay behind the yellow line. Can I hold the flashlight when I ask?" Nothing heavier than the small wrench. "You don't touch the bus unless I'm standing beside you." Lily nodded with the solemn concentration children used when trusted with something real. Margaret approached the workbench and placed 2 folded bills beside Mason's gloves. He picked them up, laid them on top of the red notebook, and slid both back to her. "I can pay something. Not for this." "Why?" Mason glanced at the names on the route sheet. "Because children were inside when that light came on." Margaret's eyes lowered to the money. For a second, the hard line around her mouth softened. She opened the notebook. Each page was ruled in careful blue ink. Date, time, weather, location, speed, warning sound, pressure reading. October 8th, 7:12 a.m., East Grade. October 22nd, 2:46 p.m., Church Crossing. Thursday, 6:53 a.m., County Road 9. 6 separate incidents. 6 entries beginning after the same maintenance visit. In the margin beside each one, Margaret had written the same work order number, WO4187. Mason copied it onto a clean inspection sheet. "Who gave you that number?" "It was printed on the service tag after they returned the bus." "Do you still have the tag?" "Victor took it when I filed the second report." Her answer came without hesitation. Mason did not praise her memory. He treated it as information worthy of being checked. That respect seemed to affect Margaret more than sympathy would have. She stepped away and typed a message into her phone. "I found someone willing to listen." Miles away, in a quiet state office, Rebecca Hale read the message twice. She knew her mother rarely asked anyone for help, but the text did not say who had listened or what had finally been heard. Back at Ellis Auto and Diesel, Mason opened the exterior service panel without removing any protected component. Lily held the red flashlight from behind the line, its beam resting where he directed. He placed his mechanical stethoscope against the frame, then shifted it toward the brake control housing. The battery was disconnected. The ignition key sat on the workbench. Still, beneath the cooling metal, a faint electrical vibration pulsed at regular intervals. Mason checked the disconnect twice, then looked at Margaret's 6 entries and the repeated work order number. Victor had treated a free safety check as the harmless stubbornness of a poor mechanic who did not understand policy. In doing so, he had left Mason with the bus, the untouched records, and the one witness no one had respected enough to silence properly. By choosing to prove that an older driver had not imagined the danger, Mason had found the first thing the district could not explain. A dead bus was still feeding power to the very system it claimed had never failed. The faint electrical pulse did not stop when Mason disconnected the battery a second time. It traveled through the metal housing in slow, regular beats, too deliberate to be residual charge and too weak to trigger the dashboard again. Margaret heard nothing, but she saw the change in Mason's face, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his hand became still against the frame. "What is it?" "I don't know yet." "Is the bus dangerous?" "I know enough not to guess." The fluorescent lights buzzed above them. Rain tapped against the service door, and somewhere near the back wall, the old compressor released a tired breath of air. Mason removed the mechanical stethoscope and set it on a clean towel. He had barely reached for his multimeter when Frank's office phone began to ring. Frank looked at the caller identification and let it ring twice before answering. "Ellis Auto and Diesel." His expression tightened. "Yes, he's here." He turned slightly away, though the garage was too quiet for privacy. "No, nothing has been driven." "No, sir. I understand." Mason watched Frank's free hand close around the edge of the desk. "We performed no road test." Pause followed. He opened the exterior service panel. Another pause, longer this time. "I'll tell him." Frank returned the receiver to its cradle with more care than necessary. "District Compliance Office." "That was fast," Margaret said. Victor reported unauthorized interference. Frank looked toward Mason. "They say any damage found after delivery becomes our responsibility." Margaret's mouth tightened. "The damage was already there." "I know what you said." Frank's voice softened, but fear sat beneath it. "They're documenting this as a mechanic ignoring a direct order after an elderly driver made an unverified complaint." Margaret lowered the red notebook. The description had been built to sound reasonable. No one had called her incompetent. No one had called Mason dishonest. They had simply arranged the words so that one became unreliable and the other reckless. Mason pulled off his gloves and placed them beside the inspection sheet. "Did they say what I damaged?" Frank hesitated. "The brake control system. I haven't opened it. They said access alone may have changed the condition." Mason looked toward the dark service panel. "Then we stop." Margaret stared at him. "You're giving up?" "No." He walked to the breaker cabinet and switched off power to the work bay. Half the fluorescent lights died, leaving the bus beneath a colder strip of illumination from the neighboring lift. "We preserve what's here before someone decides what they need it to mean." He asked Frank to bring the garage camera clock into view and began photographing the work area from fixed positions. The disconnected battery cables, the untouched fasteners, the route notebook, the inspection sheet, and the condensation line beneath the bus. Lily remained behind the yellow boundary, holding her flashlight against her chest. "Dad," she said, "the orange part is showing more." Mason followed the beam. At the edge of the white inspection sticker on the windshield, the narrow orange layer beneath had widened as the damp air softened the adhesive. He moved close but did not touch it. "Was it like that before?" Lily shook her head. "Only a tiny line. You took a picture." She pointed toward his phone on the workbench. Her observation was simple, nothing more than a child remembering the shape of a color. Mason opened the photograph from Friday afternoon and enlarged the windshield. She was right. The orange strip had been almost hidden when the bus arrived. Now the white sticker had lifted enough to reveal part of a printed word beneath it. Frank leaned closer. "Could be an old inspection label." "Could be," Mason said. Margaret studied the glass. "Why cover it instead of removing it?" No one answered. Mason placed a ruler beside the sticker without touching the adhesive and photographed it again. Then he returned to the brake housing. The weak vibration still pulsed through the frame, though the bay power and vehicle battery remained disconnected. He traced the wiring by sight until he found a secondary lead wrapped in black tape behind the main harness. The tape looked newer than the surrounding insulation, glossy where the original wiring had gone dull with age. Mason did not cut it. He followed the lead toward a protective cover secured by 4 bolts. 3 bolts carried the same dark factory finish. The 4th was bright silver and bore fresh tool marks. "That one was replaced," Frank said. "Or removed," Mason replied. Margaret's phone vibrated in her coat pocket. A message from an unknown district number appeared on the screen. "For your protection, please refrain from discussing vehicle concerns until your fitness review is complete." She read it twice, then turned the phone face down on the workbench. "They've scheduled a fitness review?" Mason asked. "They called it protection." Her voice held no anger, only exhaustion. Mason looked at the red notebook beside her hand. "Don't answer tonight. My daughter could stop this." "Maybe." He met Margaret's eyes. "But if the facts only matter because of who she is, they'll stop mattering the moment she leaves the room." Margaret did not ask how he knew she had a daughter with influence. He meant no one in particular. Still, the words made her hand pause above the phone. Miles away, Rebecca Hale received a notification that a transportation complaint had been filed under Margaret's legal name. Because the driver was her mother, the governor's ethics council advised that she not contact the district directly until an independent reviewer assessed the evidence. Rebecca agreed. She did not trust Victor, but neither would she trust a mechanic she had never met simply because her mother did. She opened the attached summary and stopped at one sentence. "Vehicle declared electrically unrecoverable. Diagnostic access prohibited to preserve stored fault data." The contradiction was small, procedural, almost easy to dismiss. Rebecca read it again. Back in the garage, Mason removed the 4 cover bolts only after Frank began recording and Margaret stated the time aloud. The protective plate came free with a soft metallic click. Behind it sat the brake control module, its plastic casing blistered brown near one corner. A sour smell of burned insulation escaped into the cold air. The wiring connector had been spliced. 2 mounting screws showed repeated tool wear. Along the lower edge, yellow paint formed a rough triangle, the kind salvage yards used to mark removed parts. Frank's face changed. "The service record says factory new." Mason did not answer. He angled Lily's flashlight across the casing, and shallow grooves appeared where someone had ground away the serial number. Almost all of it was gone. Almost. For characters remained tight against a raised ridge where the grinding wheel had not reached. Margaret stepped forward but stayed outside the marked area. "Can you identify it?" "Not from 4 characters." "Then it proves nothing." "Not yet." Mason's answer carried neither disappointment nor triumph. He reached for a clean pair of gloves, lifted the module straight out, and placed it on a white shop cloth. As he turned it, a brittle piece of orange adhesive fell from the underside and landed near his wrist. Black letters remained across the torn fragment. "Do not install RE." Frank inhaled sharply. Margaret's hand moved toward her phone, but Mason shook his head. "First we document." He photographed the fragment where it had fallen, then placed it beside the module with a ruler and the garage clock visible behind it. Lily watched from the yellow line. "Dad, I took one before it fell." Mason looked at her. She held up the phone he had given her earlier to photograph only what he pointed toward. On the screen was the module still inside the housing, the orange warning label intact enough to show a second, smaller number beneath the torn words. Mason enlarged the image. It was not the serial number. It was not the work order number in Margaret's notebook. It was a Federal Recall reference, and the first digits matched an alert issued for parts that were supposed to have been destroyed. The Federal Recall number on Lily's photograph did not prove who installed the module, who altered its serial number, or why the warning label had been hidden. It proved only one thing. A part listed in the district records as factory new carried the mark of a safety alert meant to keep it away from children. Mason did not celebrate. He placed Lily's phone beside the garage clock, photographed the original image on screen, and wrote the file time on the inspection sheet. "Can you fix the bus?" Margaret asked. "Maybe." "Can you prove the part was bad?" "Not by looking at it." Frank stood beneath the flickering light with his arms folded tightly across his chest. The smell of scorched plastic lingered above the white cloth, mixing with diesel, wet concrete, and coffee that had burned down to a bitter film in the pot. Outside, rainwater slipped from the roof in steady silver threads. "The district will say we damaged it when we removed it," Frank said. "Then we prove what happened before we touched it." Mason crossed to an old gray diagnostic cart near the rear lift. The machine was outdated, its plastic housing yellowed at the corners, but Mason kept it calibrated because older school buses often stored information newer. Wireless tools failed to read cleanly. He checked the seal on the data cable, photographed the odometer, and asked Frank to stand where the garage camera could see both his hands and the connection port. Margaret watched from beside the workbench. Lily had moved to Frank's office behind the glass, where she could finish her homework without crossing the safety line. She still held the red flashlight in her lap. Mason connected the scanner. The screen blinked once, then displayed a warning that the vehicle identification did not match the maintenance profile stored under work order WO 4187. Frank leaned closer. "What does that mean?" "Could be a clerical error. Or someone loaded a service file from another vehicle." Mason pressed nothing until the scanner created a read-only copy. Lines of fault history appeared one by one. Most had been cleared. One had not. A freeze-frame record remained locked beneath the brake control failure code, created at 6:54 Thursday morning, more than 24 hours before Bus 17 arrived at Ellis Auto and Diesel. The record showed the vehicle moving at 32 miles per hour. Module voltage had dropped sharply. Brake pressure had fallen below the district's minimum threshold. The emergency system had activated for 11 seconds before pressure partially returned. Margaret moved closer, her breath catching at the time. "County Road 9, she whispered. "That was the hill." Mason looked at her red notebook. Her entry read 6:53. The bus computer read 6:54. 1 minute apart. "You reported it immediately?" he asked. "As soon as I found a safe shoulder. And they told you the sensor was wrong." Margaret nodded. Mason printed the freeze-frame record. The printer rollers squeaked, and the narrow sheet emerged slowly beneath the green glow of the display. Frank pulled a chair from the office, but stopped halfway across the floor. The metal legs no longer scraped. For several seconds, the only sound in the garage was the paper feeding through the machine. The record did not prove fraud. It did not identify who installed the recalled module, but it proved the failure existed while Margaret was driving the route before Mason opened the service panel, before Frank accepted the bus, and before anyone could accuse the garage of causing the damage. Lily appeared behind the office glass. "Does that mean Mrs. Hale was right?" Mason looked toward Margaret before answering. "It means the bus recorded what she felt." Margaret lowered her eyes. Relief did not arrive as a smile. It came as the slow release of her shoulders after months of carrying a story everyone had treated like confusion. Mason did not use the moment to attack Victor. He placed the printout beside her notebook and aligned the 2 times. "Your report was accurate," he said. "Nothing more." He then retrieved a certified replacement module from Frank's locked inventory. The box carried an intact manufacturer seal, a traceable serial number, and a service bulletin confirming compatibility with Bus 17. Before opening it, Mason photographed every side. He mounted the replacement without erasing the original freeze frame and connected the brake system to a stationary pressure testing rig. "No road test," he told Frank. "No children. No guessing." The first cycle raised pressure slowly. The needle trembled near the lower limit, then settled. The second cycle held longer. On the third, Mason activated the simulated emergency load. The warning light came on, the backup system responded, and the pressure remained inside the safe range. The bus had not been beyond repair. A correct module had changed the entire behavior of the system. The service door opened before Mason could print the third result. Victor entered without an umbrella, though his overcoat carried only a few dark spots from the rain. He held a district folder and wore the composed expression of a man arriving to prevent a misunderstanding. "I was told you continued working," We performed a stationary safety test, Mason said, without authorization, with a witness, recorded data, and no road operation. Victor glanced at the diagnostic cart. His eyes paused on the fresh printout before returning to Mason. This does not need to become larger than it is. A brake failure on a school route is already large. That language creates unnecessary fear. Victor opened the folder and placed a prepared statement on the workbench. It said unauthorized handling by Ellis Auto and Diesel may have compromised the brake control unit and altered recoverable data. A signature line waited beneath Mason's name. Sign this, Victor said. The district can treat the matter as a procedural mistake instead of deliberate interference. Frank's fingers tightened around the back of the chair. Margaret looked toward Mason, afraid he might lose the garage to protect her word. Mason read the statement once, then returned the pen. Add the time of the original failure. Victor did not move. That is not relevant to your unauthorized work. Mason placed the freeze-frame printout beside the statement. Thursday, 6:54 a.m. The bus reached this shop Friday afternoon. Write that down, and I'll acknowledge every step I performed after delivery. Victor's gaze settled on the numbers. The mask of concern remained, but something behind it had begun to calculate. Electronic records can be misunderstood. Then let an independent technician read the original. That will not be necessary. Why not? The question was quiet. It slowed the room more effectively than an accusation. Rain ticked against the windows. The office heater clicked off, leaving the air conditioner vent above the desk suddenly audible. Victor reached for the statement, but Mason placed one gloved finger on the corner before he could remove it. Frank needs a copy of anything brought into his shop. Victor released the paper. Of course, we all want transparency. He looked at the sealed evidence box. Did you open the JX-47 casing? Mason's hand became still. Frank looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at the blackened module resting under clear evidence film. No one outside the garage had been told the model designation. The recall photograph showed only part of the federal reference, and Mason's report had not yet named JX-47. Victor noticed the silence and corrected himself smoothly. That is the standard unit used in vehicles of this age. Not according to the district service record, Mason said. Victor closed the folder. Send your material through proper channels. Do not contact the press. Do not encourage Mrs. Hale to misinterpret preliminary data. Margaret lifted her chin. My name is Margaret. Victor gave her a courteous nod, as though the correction proved his patience. Mrs. Hale, I am trying to protect you from becoming part of something unnecessarily public. Mason copied the freeze-frame file onto 3 drives. One remained in Frank's safe. One went into a signed envelope for the State Transportation Office. The third he sealed and handed to Margaret, not because of who she was, but because she had been inside the bus when the failure occurred. Victor watched every movement, then left with the unsigned statement still on the workbench. In the state capitol, Rebecca Hale received notice that her mother's official complaint now included original vehicle data. On advice from Ethics Counsel, she removed herself from the initial review, ordered the source files preserved, and requested that no district employee be allowed to delete or overwrite related maintenance records. She had not decided Mason was right. She had decided the evidence deserved the chance to survive. Back at the garage, Lily stepped from the office after Victor's sedan disappeared. Are they going to believe her now? Mason looked at the matching times in the notebook and the freeze frame. They can't say the bus stayed silent. Margaret's phone vibrated. The number belonged to a retired dispatcher she had not spoken to in months. A voicemail icon appeared beneath a message only 6 words long. I found the Thursday route recording. Margaret played the voicemail on speaker beside the sealed evidence box. At first there was only static, the dry hiss of an old dispatch recorder, a chair rolling somewhere across a tile floor, the distant squawk of a radio. Then her own voice emerged, thinner than it sounded in the garage. Dispatch, this is Bus 17. Brake pressure warning on County Road 9. I need permission to stop the route. A man answered after 4 seconds. The sensors on those older units throw false alarms. Complete the last 2 stops and bring it back to the yard. Margaret closed her eyes. Mason looked at the time stamped beneath the audio file. Thursday, 6:54 a.m. It matched the freeze frame locked inside the bus computer. It matched the entry in Margaret's red notebook within 1 minute. 3 records, created independently, now described the same moment. Is that Victor? Frank asked. Margaret nodded. The fluorescent tube above the workbench flickered, steadied, then seemed louder in the silence that followed. He told me later there was no recording, she said. He said the system had overwritten it. Mason replayed the clip without changing the volume. This time he listened past the words. A printer ran in the background. A radio dispatcher read another vehicle number. Then, just before Victor told Margaret to continue the route, a short electronic tone sounded from his desk terminal. The original file needs to be preserved, Mason said. The dispatcher kept it on an old backup server, Margaret replied. He said the district ordered the archive cleared last month, but this copy was attached to an incident report he took home when he retired. Frank looked toward the office window, where Lily sat coloring the border of her math worksheet. That could become a problem for him. It already became a problem for her, Mason said quietly. He did not mean Margaret's employment. He meant the moment she had driven downhill with children behind her, while a warning light flashed and the person responsible for safety told her to keep moving. Margaret's hand rested on the red notebook. There were 17 children on that bus. And you stopped anyway, Mason said. After the second warning. You found a shoulder. He told me to finish the route. You still found a shoulder. He did not call her heroic. He returned the choice to her, where the district had tried to erase it. Margaret breathed in slowly, and some of the shame Victor had wrapped around her memory seemed to loosen. Mason copied the recording to a clean drive, wrote the source and time on the envelope, and asked the retired dispatcher to send the original directly to the state transportation inspector. He did not send it to a reporter. He did not play it for the parents gathering online after rumors of the brake failure began spreading. Through Pine Ridge, anger could make the truth louder, but it could also make it easier to dismiss. People should hear this, Frank said. They will, Mason replied, after someone verifies it. Frank pulled open a dented filing cabinet beneath the parts counter. Ellis Auto and Diesel had serviced district support trucks years earlier, before Victor consolidated nearly all fleet work under Briggs Fleet Components. Frank kept old invoices because he trusted paper more than software. Dust lifted from the folders as he carried 3 boxes to the steel table. For nearly an hour, Mason compared work orders, vehicle numbers, part descriptions, and service dates. Lily stayed in the office, occasionally holding up a drawing through the glass when she thought her father needed to see it. Margaret made coffee no one remembered to drink. The first match appeared on an invoice for Bus 23, JX 47 brake control module. Work order WO 4187. The second appeared on Bus 11. Same module, same work order number. Then Bus 29, Bus 6, Bus 14, and a reserve vehicle assigned to middle school athletics. 6 buses, 6 installations, 1 repeated code. Could be a blanket purchase order, Frank said. Could be, Mason replied. He kept reading. 3 inspection certificates sat behind the invoices. Each carried a different vehicle number, but the certification field showed the same document code. Even the typing error in the phrase pneumatic pressure was identical. Victor's signature appeared at the bottom of all 3. The dates were separated by 5 weeks. Frank turned toward the security monitor mounted above the office door. He signed the one for Bus 29 here. You remember? He was supposed to, but he canceled. Frank searched the garage archive by date. Grainy video filled the screen. An empty service bay, rain streaking the camera lens, employees moving through a slow afternoon. Victor never entered the building. At the time stamped on the certificate, Frank was alone beside Bus 29. A copied form does not prove he knew the parts were recalled, Mason said. Margaret studied him. You keep giving them the innocent explanation. Until the innocent explanation stops. Fitting. They found the next document inside a Briggs shipping packet. It was a certificate of destruction stating that a recalled lot of JX-47 modules had been crushed and disposed of under federal safety guidance. The surviving 4 characters on Mason's burned module matched the lot range. The destruction certificate was dated August 14th. The district purchase invoice for the same lot was dated September 6th. Frank's old printer clicked as Mason produced copies. Page after page settled onto the tray until the machine stopped and the garage became unnaturally still. The certificate lay between the burned module and Margaret's notebook like a statement no one in the room wanted to say aloud. Maybe the invoice used the wrong lot number, Frank offered. Mason nodded. Then the warehouse log will show a different shipment. A state inspector responded to the preserve data request 20 minutes later. Briggs Fleet Components had reported the recalled lot destroyed, but a transportation gate log showed one of its trucks entering the district maintenance yard after midnight on September 5th. The load description read replacement electrical assemblies. No serial numbers were recorded. The following morning, WO4187 was opened for 6 vehicles. Margaret stared at the dates. They did this to all of them. We know the paperwork repeats, Mason said. We know the symptoms repeat. We don't know yet who approved the shipment or why. Victor signed the inspections. And Nolan Briggs signed the destruction certificate. What else do you need? Mason looked toward Lily through the office glass. Enough that no one can bury this by saying an angry driver and a desperate mechanic misunderstood a stack of forms. The word desperate was not self-pity. It was recognition. Victor already knew how to frame him. A low-wage mechanic with overdue bills, a struggling garage, and an opportunity to create paid work by declaring a district vehicle reparable. Every correct action needed a record because Mason's character alone would not be admitted as evidence. Frank searched one final folder marked Fleet Replacement Proposals. Inside was a preliminary order for 12 new school buses, bundled with a maintenance agreement from Briggs Fleet Components. The document had not been approved, but Nolan's price authorization was already signed. The date was Wednesday, 2 days before Bus 17 was condemned. Mason compared the route suspension clause with Victor's Friday paperwork. The replacement proposal became active if the Pine Ridge route lost service because the existing vehicle was deemed uneconomical to repair. They priced the replacement before they inspected the failure, Frank said. It could still be contingency planning, Mason replied, though his voice had grown quieter. A notification appeared on Margaret's phone. Victor had scheduled her fitness review for Monday morning at 8. A second message informed Frank that the garage's operating license would be temporarily suspended at the same hour for unauthorized work on district property. Mason checked the state inspector's confirmation. The independent team could not arrive until 8:15. 15 minutes. Long enough for the district to remove the bus, claim the module, and close the garage doors. Margaret reached into her wallet and removed a photograph worn soft along the edges. In it, she stood beneath the state capitol steps beside Rebecca Hale on Inauguration Day. The governor's hand rested around her mother's arm. "Rebecca is my daughter," Margaret said. Mason looked from the photograph to the woman in the district jacket. He did not ask why she had hidden it. Margaret answered anyway. "My husband died after a maintenance warning was buried 22 years ago. Rebecca built her career believing better rules could stop that from happening again. I kept driving because I believed someone had to know what those rules felt like from behind the wheel." She placed the photograph beside the red notebook. "I didn't want them to believe me because I was the governor's mother. They should believe you because the recording matches the machine," Mason said. Margaret's eyes shone, but she did not look away. In the Capitol, Rebecca reviewed the authenticated recording, the freeze frame, the duplicated inspections, and the destruction certificate. She did not call her mother. She did not call Mason. She authorized an independent inspection team, ordered the district server preserved, and asked one question of the state auditor. Was a replacement contract prepared before the vehicle was condemned? The answer had not yet arrived when Frank's security alert sounded. On the monitor, Victor Crane and Nolan Briggs stood outside the locked yard gate with a tow truck, a district attorney, and an order to seize bus 17 at 8 Monday morning. By then, the truth was too large for a private meeting, but the men who controlled the paperwork still had 15 minutes to make the evidence disappear. At 7:43 Monday morning, Ellis Auto and Diesel no longer felt like a garage. It felt like a hearing room built from steel tables, stained concrete, and the cold white glare of fluorescent lights. Bus 17 stood in the center bay with its yellow nose facing the open service door. The burned brake control module rested inside a sealed metal box on Mason Reed's workbench, beside Margaret Hale's red route notebook and the unsigned statement Victor had tried to make him accept. Mason had slept less than 2 hours. His faded navy coveralls were clean only at the shoulders, and a gray shadow of exhaustion sat beneath his eyes, but every document on the table was labeled, copied, and arranged in the order it had been found. Lily remained inside Frank's office behind the safety glass. Her backpack rested beneath the desk, and the red flashlight lay beside her hand. Frank stood near the front counter, watching the wall clock move toward 8. They'll suspend the license first. Probably. Then they'll say nothing we found is admissible. Maybe. You're very calm for a man about to lose his job. Mason aligned the corner of the freeze-frame printout with Margaret's notebook. Being loud won't make the timestamps clearer. At 7:51, Victor Crane's district sedan entered the yard, followed by Nolan Briggs in a black pickup, a tow truck, and a county patrol car. A district attorney stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. Victor wore the same charcoal overcoat and measured expression he had worn on Friday, as though he had come to solve an unfortunate misunderstanding between reasonable adults. Nolan remained near the tow truck, speaking quietly into his phone while studying the open garage doors. Parents had begun gathering along the edge of the property. A school board member stood beneath an umbrella. 2 teachers from Pine Ridge Elementary watched from beside the fence. No one raised their voice. That made the pressure heavier. Victor entered first. Mr. Ellis, effective at 8 o'clock, your operating authority is temporarily suspended pending review of unauthorized work on district property. Frank accepted the document without reading it. His hands shook once, then stopped. Victor turned toward Mason. The district is still willing to resolve this without litigation. How? Mason asked. The attorney opened the portfolio and placed 2 pages on the counter. Ellis Auto and Diesel would surrender bus 17, return all district-owned components, acknowledge that unauthorized diagnostic access may have altered stored data, and agree not to discuss the matter publicly. In exchange, the district would defer enforcement action against the garage. That protects everyone, Victor said. Margaret gave a short, humorless breath. Not everyone. Victor looked at her with practiced concern. Mrs. Hale, your fitness review can also remain confidential. There is no reason to make a difficult transition more painful than necessary. He had offered her dignity in exchange for silence, then made it sound like mercy. Mason did not reach for the agreement. Who receives the module? District maintenance. Under whose signature? That is an internal matter. Mason placed a blank chain of custody form on the steel table. Then write the name. Victor's eyes moved toward the sealed box. The component is district property. I didn't say it wasn't. You have no legal authority to retain it. Then sign for it. The garage grew quiet enough for the rainwater dripping from the tow truck's undercarriage to be heard against the gravel. Victor glanced at the attorney, who lowered his voice and spoke near his shoulder. Nolan stepped forward before they finished. This is getting theatrical. It's an old control unit from an old bus. Even if it failed, that does not establish fraud, conspiracy, or deliberate danger. Recalled inventory can be reconditioned legally under approved procedures. It was the first explanation that made several people outside the bay shift uncertainly. A school board member nodded. One parent lowered her phone. Nolan continued, calm now that he had found ground that sounded technical. Mr. Reed removed the unit without authorization, installed another component, and then tested the system using equipment the district did not certify. Any comparison between the original condition and the current condition is compromised. For a moment, the argument settled over the garage like dust. It was plausible. Mason had touched the bus. He had removed the module. He had replaced it. No amount of quiet character could erase those facts. Victor saw the hesitation in the crowd and stepped beside Nolan. This is why procedures matter. Good intentions do not replace authorization. Mason looked through the office window. Lily was watching him, one hand resting beside the flashlight. She did not look frightened. She looked as though she was waiting for him to do what he always did when something mechanical failed. Stop guessing, trace the sequence, and begin with what could be proven. Mason picked up the first item. This photograph was taken when Bus 17 arrived Friday afternoon. He placed the image beneath the work light. It showed the windshield inspection sticker, the odometer, the vehicle plate, and the altered final character on the condemnation form. No panel had been opened. He placed down the second photograph, taken before the module was removed. The orange warning label remained attached beneath the casing, and the digital file time appeared in the lower corner. Lily lifted her red flashlight from behind the glass and pointed it toward the photo, not toward the adults. That part was already torn, she said softly. Frank opened the office door only long enough to tell her she was right, then closed it again. Mason did not draw the child into the confrontation. He simply placed the photograph beside the sealed box. The condition was documented before removal. Next came the freeze frame. This was created Thursday at 6:54 in the morning, while the bus was moving at 32 miles per hour. Margaret opened her notebook to the matching entry. I called dispatch at 6:53. The retired dispatcher's recording played through a small speaker. Margaret's warning filled the garage, followed by Victor's voice instructing her to complete the final stops. No one outside whispered now. Victor waited until the recording ended. An operational decision made from incomplete information does not establish misconduct. Sensors on aging vehicles do create false warnings. It was another reasonable answer, another path back toward doubt. Mason nodded once. That is possible. Victor seemed almost relieved. Then Mason placed the 3 successful stationary test reports beside the failed module data. The warning disappeared only after a certified replacement unit was installed. Same bus, same wiring, same pressure rig. Nolan folded his arms. That still does not establish the original unit source. No, Mason said. It doesn't. He turned the steel table slightly so everyone could see the sealed box. That is why it has not been opened again. At 8 o'clock exactly, Victor handed Frank the suspension order. The tow operator started toward the bus. Mason did not block him. He stepped aside and held out the custody form. You can take the bus. Sign your name beside the part first. The operator stopped. Victor's polite expression tightened at the corners. Do not obstruct a lawful transfer. I'm documenting it. You are delaying it. By asking who accepts evidence? Nolan's phone disappeared into his coat pocket. A line of perspiration had appeared along his temple despite the cold morning. He looked toward the security camera above Frank's office, then toward the sealed module. That recalled lot was destroyed months ago, he said. The sentence entered the room quietly. It did not sound like a confession. It sounded like irritation. But the box had not been opened. The surviving 4-character code had not been read publicly, and no one outside the investigation had identified the component as part of a recalled lot. Margaret turned toward Nolan. Frank's hand slowly lowered from the suspension paper. Even Victor stopped moving. Before anyone could answer, 3 black SUVs entered the yard. Governor Rebecca Hale stepped out with a state transportation inspector, an ethics attorney, and an auditor carrying a dark blue evidence case. She did not approach Margaret. She did not greet Mason. She walked directly to the steel table and looked at every item without touching it. Who currently controls the scene? She asked. Victor recovered first. The district does, Governor. We are executing a lawful recovery of school property after unauthorized mechanical work. Rebecca looked at the unsigned silence agreement, then at the chain of custody form no one had signed. Has the evidence box been transferred? Not yet. Has its seal been broken? Not since Mr. Reed packaged the component, Frank said. Rebecca turned to Mason. Did you contact the press? No. Did you erase the original vehicle data? No. Did you drive the bus? No. 3 answers. The air smelled of wet wool, coffee, and burned plastic trapped beneath the metal seal. Rebecca's eyes rested on Mason a moment longer, not with trust, not yet, but with recognition that every tempting shortcut had been refused. She motioned to the state inspector. Record the seal. Open the box under camera. Victor stepped forward. Governor, before this becomes a spectacle, I strongly recommend a private review. Rebecca did not raise her voice. Children rode that route. The review stopped being private when their warnings were buried. The inspector positioned a camera above the table. He read the seal number aloud, cut the evidence tape, and lifted the burned module beneath the white light. 4 characters remained along the ridge. Nolan looked away before the inspector finished reading them. The auditor did not look at the module at all. He opened his laptop, entered the code, and turned the screen toward Rebecca. That identifier appears in a server email sent Thursday night, he said. Then he placed one finger above the unopened message. Before I display it, everyone in this garage should understand. This file includes instructions about Bus 17, the tow order, and removal of the control unit before an outside inspection. The auditor opened the email. Its subject line read Unit 17 disposal, and the timestamp showed 9:18 Thursday night, hours after Margaret reported the brake failure and before anyone had performed an independent inspection. Victor Crane's name appeared in the sender field. Nolan Briggs was the recipient. The message contained 3 sentences. Unit 17 will be condemned Monday. Have the tow ready. Replacement package moves once the route is suspended. Beneath it, Nolan's reply was shorter. Remove the JX-47 before outside inspection. For several seconds, no one moved. The laptop fan whispered against the steel table. Rainwater dropped from the tow truck in slow, hollow taps, and Bus 17 idled behind Mason with the steady pulse of a machine that had survived the decision made about it. Victor's attorney reached toward the screen. We need to verify context. The auditor turned the laptop away from his hand. The server copy includes metadata, routing history, and archived attachments. Draft communications can be misunderstood. Then we'll read the attachments. Rebecca Hale's voice remained level. She stood at the end of the workbench, one hand resting beside the dark blue evidence case, her face giving nothing away. The auditor opened the first file. It was the preliminary purchase agreement for 12 replacement buses and a long-term maintenance package from Briggs Fleet Components. Nolan's price authorization had been signed on Wednesday, 2 days before Bus 17 arrived at Ellis Auto and Diesel. A clause near the bottom activated the purchase if the Pine Ridge route was suspended because its current vehicle had been declared uneconomical to repair. The second attachment was the tow request. It had been prepared Thursday night. The scheduled recovery time was 8 o'clock Monday morning, the same hour Victor arranged for Frank's garage license to be suspended. Coincidence, Nolan said, but the word came out dry. He cleared his throat. Fleet replacements require contingency planning. Every district prepares alternatives. Mason did not answer. He looked at the burned module beneath the inspection light, then at the intact replacement unit mounted inside the bus. One part had carried children down a hill while failing. The other had allowed the same bus to pass 3 stationary pressure tests. The difference lay on the table in blackened plastic and 4 surviving characters. The transportation inspector lifted the module and read the code again. He entered it into the Federal Recall database, then rotated his screen toward the camera. The JX-47 belonged to a production lot ordered removed from service because internal voltage loss could trigger sudden brake pressure warnings and intermittent emergency response. Briggs Fleet Components had filed a certificate stating every unit in that lot had been destroyed on August 14th. The module in the inspector's gloved hands had not been destroyed. It had been installed on a school bus. There may have been a warehouse substitution, Nolan said. Improper labeling. An employee error. That is possible, Mason said. Every eye shifted toward him. He did not sound eager to condemn anyone. That made Nolan's breathing more visible. Mason placed Margaret's red notebook beside the freeze-frame printout. One wrong label could explain one part. It doesn't explain 6 vehicles under the same work order. Frank laid the old invoices across the table one at a time. Bus 23, Bus 11, Bus 29, Bus 6, Bus 14. The reserve athletics vehicle. Each carried the JX-47 designation. Each traced back to WO 4187. The state inspector opened the district maintenance archive Rebecca had ordered preserved. 3 inspection certificates appeared on the monitor. Different buses, different dates, the same document code, the same typing error, Victor's signature beneath each one. Those forms were generated by staff, Victor said. His voice remained controlled, but his right hand had begun rubbing the edge of his folder. Supervisors often sign batches after technicians complete the work. Frank moved to the security monitor and opened the archived garage footage. On the date Victor certified Bus 29, the bay remained visible for 6 continuous hours. Frank worked alone. Victor never entered. No district technician appeared. No inspection equipment was brought through the door. The footage ended with Frank shutting off the lights. The school board member near the fence lowered his umbrella without noticing the rain landing on his shoulders. The retired dispatcher's recording played next. Margaret's voice reported the pressure warning. Victor's voice told her to finish the last 2 stops. The freeze frame placed the bus at 32 miles per hour 1 minute later, pressure below the district minimum. Victor stared at the speaker. I made an operational judgment based on the information available. You made a judgment, Rebecca said. Then your office rewrote her report as driver anxiety. Margaret stood beside Mason, holding the red notebook with both hands. She was no longer trying to make herself smaller. You told them I was confused. Victor looked toward her but did not meet her eyes. I was trying to protect you from the consequences of an unverified accusation. You were protecting the paperwork, Margaret said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Rebecca waited until the final audio verification appeared on the inspector's tablet. Only then did she act. Effective immediately, every district vehicle carrying a JX-47 from this lot is removed from service pending independent inspection. All records connected to WO4187, the replacement proposal, and Briggs fleet components are to be preserved under state order. Mr. Crane's access to transportation systems is suspended. The Briggs contract and all pending payments are frozen. This matter will be referred to the State Inspector General and the appropriate procurement authorities. Nolan's phone slipped from his hand and struck the concrete with a flat crack. He bent to retrieve it, then stopped when the auditor asked him not to touch any device connected to the investigation. Victor's folder slid against his coat. Several papers spilled across the wet edge of the floor, but no one moved to help him gather them. Rebecca turned toward Frank. The garage suspension is stayed pending independent review. No district employee will remove this bus or its components today. Then she faced Margaret. She did not call her mom. Mrs. Hale, your driver. Fitness review is canceled. Your original safety reports will be restored to the record, and retaliation protections begin now. Margaret's fingers loosened around the notebook. The leather cover opened slightly, revealing page after page of dates no one had wanted to read. Mason reached over and closed it gently, not to silence her, but because she no longer needed to hold it like a shield. Rebecca looked at him last. Mr. Reed, explain what happened to this bus. Mason placed the burned module beside Lily's photograph. The image showed the orange warning label still attached before removal, the timestamp clear in the corner. He rested one hand on the steel table. The driver warned them. The bus warned them. The records warned them. He looked toward the 17 names taped beside the folding door. They chose the contract. Nothing followed.
No aplausos.
No triumphant voices. The compressor remained silent. The fluorescent lights hummed above the evidence, and the smallest sounds became impossible to ignore. Margaret's slow breath, rain touching the metal roof, the soft ticking of the cooling tow engine. Behind the office glass, Lily lowered her red flashlight and switched it off. The click carried across the entire garage. Victor could not look at Margaret. Nolan stood with his hands open and empty. The parents who had arrived expecting an argument stared at Mason as if seeing him for the first time. Not as a poor mechanic, not as a man asking to be believed, but as someone whose discipline had kept the truth alive long enough for the system to face it. Rebecca stepped closer to the workbench. You protected evidence when exposing it would have been easier. You protected Mrs. Hale's testimony when using my name would have been faster. And you protected that bus while they were trying to take your livelihood. Mason glanced through the glass at Lily. She pressed her palm against the window, and he lifted his hand in return without leaving the table. Justice had begun, but the garage still carried the weight of unpaid bills, a damaged reputation, a frightened owner, an exhausted driver, and a daughter who had watched her father risk what little they had. Rebecca followed his eyes toward the route sheet. "What do you want, Mr. Reed?" she asked. Mason looked at the 17 student names, then at the evidence that had finally made an entire room fall silent, and considered what a man should ask for when the truth had placed power in his hands.